Hello, Algebra 1 people, and welcome to week 3 of our online learning exploration. This week, we're going to have 2 assignments. The first one will be due on Wednesday. The second one will be due on Friday. Please make sure you're watching the videos and staying on top of your studies. I know most of you are doing really well, so that's good. We finished last week looking at factoring trinomials into 2 binomials. We're going to continue that today. We're just going to add a little twist to it. And that twist is that the first term in our trinomial is not going to be 1. Before, we didn't have to worry about any coefficients in front of the x squared term, or that's the number that sits in front of the x squared term. It was always just 1. But now we should take that into consideration. So let's dive right into this and look at this first trinomial. This says 5x squared plus 11x plus 2. And before, when I put down my parentheses for my binomials, I didn't have to worry about how to get to this number. I was just writing an x here and an x here. First term in each binomial was always x. But now I have to get to 5x squared instead of just an x squared. And so you have to think about, well, 1 and 5 are the only factors that help me get to 5. And so this one doesn't end up being too bad. I'm going to write 5x and 1x are just x there, because the only way to get to 5x squared when I multiply up my binomials would be to take 5x times x. Okay? But it does come into play a little bit when we look at how to find the second term in each binomial. Here's a 2, and in order to get 2, I have to think about factors of 1 and 2. And how do I know where they go? Well, again, we're going to look towards our middle term, in this case, 11x, because what we're trying to do is combine now 1 and 5 in some way with 1 and 2 when we multiply, so that we add those center terms to get 11. Here's what you got to think about. How do I combine things? Because I know one of these is going to be 1 and one's going to be 2, but how do I know whether the 2 goes here or here? Because these are the only 2 numbers that I can look at, but I don't know which way do they go. Does the 1 go here, or does the 2 go here? And vice versa. Does the 1 go here, the 2 go here? We're trying to combine these so that when we add it together, we get to 11. So the only way that I can think about doing that is if I take the 5 from here and I multiply it by the 2 from here to get the 10. And then I can take my 1 times my 1 to give me another 1. And when I add 10 and 1 together, I'll get to 11. And that means that the 2 has to go in the second binomial, because there's no way that I could multiply it by 5 if it was in the first binomial. Notice that when we FOIL these out, we never take these 2 numbers and multiply them. We're always multiplying a number from the first bracket set of brackets or parentheses with the number times the second set of brackets. So then we also want to look at our signs. Both of these are positive. That makes things really easy. The only way to get a positive 2 is to take my positive 1 times my 2, and I'll get my 2. So once again, let's FOIL these out, and maybe things will make more sense. If I FOIL it, I have 5x times x, and that gives me 5x squared. Okay. Now it's these middle terms that are the ones that are really key, going to be key for us here. And so 5x times 2 is going to give us 10x, and then 1 times x is going to give us an x, and finally 1 times 2 is going to give us a positive 2. This is the point that I was trying to make earlier. The only way to get to 11 is if I can multiply them out and then add, so that I get like 10x plus x to give me to 11. There's no other way that it would work. If I had put the 2 here and the 1 here, I wouldn't get 11 when I combine these numbers together. Okay. So you're going to use that middle term to tell you which ones work. When you combine your like terms here, you get 5x squared plus 11x plus 2. Right? Let's do another one to see maybe if this explains it better. But notice that this one has a negative sign here, a negative 15. Again, we're going to try and factor this into two binomials. We have to look at factors of 3 now. That could be 1 and 3. That's the only choice we really have. And factors of negative 15. Well, we've got a couple choices here. It could be 1 and 15, or it could be 3 and 5. But we have a negative sign at the end, so one of these is going to have to be negative, either like a positive 1 and a negative 15, or vice versa, because when we multiply it, we get a negative 15. And again, could be a negative 3 and a positive 5, or it could be positive 3 and a negative 5. But somehow we got to multiply to get negative 15. At the same time, the middle term is 4, and it's a positive number. That's kind of important. We don't have too many choices here. 1 and 3 is all we got. So I'm going to write 3x here and x here. That way, the 3x times the 1x is going to give me 3x squared. But I've got to do some thinking here. I've got to get to 4. And one of these numbers has to be negative. That means that I'm going to really kind of be subtracting over here. I'm going to be combining a positive number with a negative number, and the result is going to be positive 4. So how can we get to 4? I mean, if we think about it, I probably don't want to take 3 times 15 because that's going to give me 45, and I don't think I can quite get to 4. I don't think I can get to 4 if I start at 45. So I'm going to say it's not that one. We can also try the 3 and the 1 with the 1 and the 15. And if there were different signs, I could do something like 15 minus 3, but that only gets me to 12. Then I need to get to 4. So I'm going to say it's probably not 1 and 15 because they just don't combine correctly to get to 4. But let's think about ways that I can combine these numbers when multiplied by these numbers and added to give me a positive 4. And I noticed that if I took 3 times 3, I'd get 9. And if I took 1 times 5, I'd get 5. And you think about 9 and 5, one of them being negative, and I could still get 4, that would work. I could take 3 times 3 to get 9, and then take 1 times, say, a negative 5 to get negative 5. And 9 minus 5 would give me 4. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to have to multiply my 3 times the 3, so the 3's got to go in the opposite binomial here. The only way that I can multiply this number times this number is if they're in different binomials. And I'm going to take my 5 and I'm going to put it here, but I'm going to make this one negative and that one positive. Because, and watch what happens when I multiply, if I multiply this out, 3x times x is going to give me my 3x squared. But here's the important part. 3x times 3 gives me a positive 9x, and then negative 5 times x gives me a minus 5x. And finally, negative 5 times 3 is going to give me that negative 15 that I wanted. But now when I combine these like terms in the middle, notice that 9x minus 5x is going to give me a positive 4x, and that's the number I was looking for. And the only way to get that, and this is true, this is the only way I could get it, is if the negative 5 was here and the positive 3 was there. All right, we've looked at 2 problems already, and in the first one, we had a positive, and notice every time you have a plus and a plus, when you factor it, your binomials are also going to have a plus and a plus. When you have a plus and a minus, then one of these is going to have to be negative and one's going to be positive. And you've got to think ahead a little bit and figure out which one is which. It doesn't mean that the first term's always negative. The first one's always going to be a minus sign, and the second one's always going to be a plus sign. These could be reversed. You might have a plus 5 and a minus 3. not for this problem, but I'm just saying when you have this situation with a plus and a minus up here, these signs, you're going to have one that's positive and one that's negative, but we can't guarantee that the first one's always negative and the second one's always positive. You have to look for what it actually works out to be. The next problem we're looking at, notice that this is now a minus sign here and a minus sign here. I have 2x squared minus 13x minus 7. And so when we have that situation, again, the only way to get a negative number on the end is to have one be negative and one be positive. So we're going to have a similar situation that we had up here, but notice in order to get a negative here, I'm going to have to have the larger term, right, before I combine. It's kind of like, you're thinking ahead looking at this step. 9x was the bigger number and it was positive, so when I combined them I got a positive 4. But over here, when I combine them, the bigger of the numbers is going to have to be negative, so that when I combine them, I still am going to be negative. Let's see how this works. Again, think of factors of 2, 1 and 2, that's my only choice. And then factors of 7, 1 and 7, that's my only choice. So let's start this off and say, well, that's a 2x and that's an x. And now I have to figure out how do I put these numbers into these slots so that when I multiply across and then combine them, I'm going to get to negative 13. And when I look at this, I go, well, 2 times 7 is 14. And remember, the signs are going to be different. So we're really kind of going to be subtracting here. 2 times 7 is 14, and 1 times 1 is 1. So 14 minus 1 would get me to a 13. But I'm going to have to start with a negative 14, aren't I? Because the middle term is negative. So how do I get to 14, you say? Well, I cannot put the 7 here, because if I did, I wouldn't be able to multiply these numbers together. So it's got to go in the other term over here. The 7's got to go here, which means your 1's going to go here. And then let's assign the signs, positive and negative, where they need to go. Since it's a negative 13, I want this one to be negative. So when I multiply these outside terms, I'm going to get negative 14. And this one's going to have to be positive. So when I multiply these, I get positive 1. Just showing you what we're going to do. I'll FOIL this back out again. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 7, that's that negative 14x we were looking for. 1 times x is an x, and then 1 times negative 7 is minus 7. So notice, when you combine these middle terms, negative 14x plus x gives us that negative 13x in the middle, and that's how it factors. Okay, we're going to move on to the last one. Mathematicians try to make things easier. I know some of you are going, they make them hard, but they really try to make things easier. And one of the methods they look at to make things easier is called factoring out a common factor first. Notice that there are 3 terms here, and in each of these 3 terms, there is a factor of 3. That is, that I could take a 3 out of each of these. So I'm going to write a 3 over here, and I'm going to rewrite this after I factored out a 3. And to do that, all I do is divide each of the terms by 3. So if I had 18x squared divided by 3, I'd get 6x squared. Now, some of you are going, well, how did he know that 3 was in common with all of them? Well, I looked at 18, and I noticed that 18 is divisible by 3. I looked at negative 33 here and noticed that that's divisible by 3, because it's 3 times 11. And then I looked at 12, and I noticed that that's also divisible by 3. So I'm looking for one number that is I can divide each of these by. And the only number that worked out for this was 3. So I took the 3 out, and now I'm going to, again, divide each of these terms by that number. So negative 33x divided by 3 is negative 11x. I just broke my lead. And 12 divided by 3 is 4. Why did I do that? Well, now I have a trinomial with easier numbers to work with than what I started with up here. It's not that I couldn't have factored this before into 2 binomials. It's just that it would have been more difficult. So I'm going to try and factor this trinomial now into a couple binomials. Now I still took my 3 out, so I'm going to keep it here. So I'm still multiplying 3 times this. I haven't changed anything. But let's go ahead and see if I can factor this. Now, 6 has factors of 1 and 6, but it also has factors of 2 and 3 that I'm going to have to consider. And 4 has factors of 1 and 4, and also factors of 2 and 2 that I have to consider. This one gets a little bit trickier because now, it might be 1 and 6. If it was, I'd have to choose either 1 and 4 or 2 and 2, or it could be 2 and 3. And again, if it was 2 and 3, I'd have to either choose 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. So now it sort of doubles the possibilities. But again, we're going to look to the middle term, which is negative 11x, and try to figure out, well, if I use 1 and 6, can I match them up with these pairs over here to get to negative 11? I don't know. This is another weird one because the signs are different, just like they were up here. But notice that in this case, the negative sign was at the end. And the only way to get a negative at the end would be to have one number positive and one number negative. But here, I have a positive number on the end, but a negative number in the middle. And what that tells me, anytime you have this situation, is that I must have multiplied two negatives together to get to the 4, because two negatives, when you multiply them, are going to be a positive. But the combination of those negative numbers is going to get me to 11. So I've got to look for numbers then when I multiply that are going to add together to be negative 11. And they're both going to be negative numbers. So I've got to get to 11. And I think that my best bets are 2 and 3 and 1 and 4, and I'll show you why. As I'm thinking ahead here, 2 times 4 is going to give me 8, and 3 times 1 is going to give me 3, and I know that 8 and 3 are going to add to be 11. So here's my candidates that I think I'm going to use. So I'm going to go up here and say 2x and 3x. Remember, we're trying to get to 6x squared, and 2x times 3x. 2x times 3x are going to get me to 6x squared. And then I said before, if I took my 2 times my 4, so I'm going to write my 4 in this binomial so I can multiply it by 2. Remember, whatever's in this binomial, you can multiply out into the next binomial. If I put the 4 here, the 2 and the 4 would never be multiplied. So 4 goes there, 1 goes here. Now, I said before, the only way to get to a positive 4 is to have both of these be negative, since when I combine my like terms, I'll get to a negative 11x. Let's just double check. I'll do this in my head. 2x times 3x is our 6x squared. And then I'm going to go 2x times negative 4 for negative 8x. And I'm going to combine that negative 8x with negative 1 times 3, which is a negative 3x, to get to that negative 11x. And then I'll take negative 1 times negative 4 to get positive 4. So here's that trinomial factored. Okay? All right. Let's move on and see what fun Manga High has in store for us on this. So we're going to start here, move Mr. Foken out of the way, and let's play. Starting off on easy here. Which of the below gives the usual first step when factoring? Okay, well, 7x and x, I think that would probably be what we're looking at. That's the only way we can get to 7x squared. 5x and x isn't going to work. 6x and x isn't going to work because we're not adding, we're multiplying. So 7x and this one look like those are the ones we want. If we were going to factor this, we've done this before in our previous video or in our previous lesson. We're looking at factors of 6, so we're going to look at probably 1 and 6 or 2 and 3, but they have to combine to be 1. So I think it's going to probably have to be something like this. It's where you got a positive 3x and a minus 2x in the middle. If we were to FOIL this out, to expand it, what is the x squared term? Well, 4x times x is 4x squared. So I think we've got that one. We're already on medium. If we factor this expression, again, this is a review from the previous lesson. If we were to factor this, we're looking for factors of negative 12 that add to be negative 1. So it can't be this one, because if I multiplied negative 3 times negative 4, it'd be positive 12, so it's not that one. This one looks like a good candidate because I'd have positive 4x and a minus 3x to give us a difference of 1, but it's the wrong way. My 4 is going to have to be negative, so here we'd have negative 4x and a positive 3x. That would give us the correct middle term. The symbols are missing on this one. So notice that the 6 on the end is negative, so my signs are going to have to be different, but they have to combine to be 7. That's a 10x and a 3, and the 7's positive, so we're going to have a positive on the 2 and a negative on the 3. That's the only way we can get a positive 7x, is to have a positive 2 and a negative 3. Which expression shows the correct first step in factoring that? Well, it'd be nice if I could factor out a common factor, but I can't because 5 is not a common factor of these two terms, so I can't factor that out. The only factors for 5 are going to be 5x and x to get your 5x squared here. Factor this expression. So the only way I can get I'm going to show you this here. The only way I can get what I'm after here is to have a 2x and an x. Now I have to think about factors of 7, but we have to get to 9. So 1 and 7 are my choices. And so I'm going to match up my 2 and my 1 and my 7 and my and that x. That way I can get to 9. Everything's positive. So that's going to be 2x and 7x to give me my 9x. So I'm going to say 2x plus 7 and x plus 1. Factoring that one. Again, not too bad because there's only one way to get 5x squared, and that's to have 5x and x. But now we got to talk about 3, and our possibilities are 1 and 3, not 13, but 1 and 3. But I got to get to 16, so I think 5 is going to have to be multiplied by the 3, and then the x is going to have to be multiplied by the 1. So you're going to get 15x and another x to get you to 16. Everything's positive. So we're going to have 5x plus 1 and x plus 3. So here we have 5x squared plus 12x plus 7. Again, 5x and x are really the only choices for this first one, but I got to think about 1 and 7 and how to get to 12. And so I think I have to do 5 times 1 and 1 times 7. So 5 times 1 and the 7 times the 1x. And again, everything being positive, we'll go with 5x plus 7 and x plus 1. Okay, last one that we're going to do. Factorization of 3x squared plus 11x. 3x squared plus 11x plus 6. So I know that, ignore these up here. I know, ignore this up here. In order to get 3x squared, I got to take 3x times x. But now I got 6, so that's either a 1 and a 6 or a 2 and a 3, but I got to get to 11. And so I think 3 times 3 gives me 9. I'll put a 3 there, and 9 and 2 is going to give me that. Everything's positive, so we'll go with 3x plus 2 and x plus 3. Again, it's this middle term that we're always kind of interested in. It tells us how that's got to go together. So 3x plus 2 and x plus 3. Yeah, that's how it goes. Spend some time on this, get it down. We'll be using factorization to actually do things later. Right now, it's sort of this weird exercise where you're finding the factorization, but you don't know why you're finding the factorization or what you do with it. And we'll talk about that coming up. But in the meantime, get some good practice on this. Have a good week. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.